everyone, and welcome to this webinar on navigating DORA compliance. My name is Ben Chant. I'm delighted you're all able to join us today. At Kroll, we're always looking to provide thoughtful insight and great value to our clients to not only help them defend their organization against the latest cyber threats, but also to stay compliant across the global regulatory landscape. Now, before we get started, I wanted to cover just a few housekeeping items. So today's session will be recorded and will be available after the briefing. So don't worry if you've missed this, we can always share that with you as well. We are using GoToWebinar platform for this presentation. So you'll find the client on your monitor, and through that you'll be able to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation, and our speakers will address the questions at the end, or we'll have people in the back behind the scenes to provide some answers during the webinar. Kroll is in a unique position to deliver end-to-end solutions across different service lines. We have a wealth of experience with over 650 cybersecurity experts on the Kroll team who are working around the globe with companies of many sizes and a variety of industries, and we work with over 85 cyber insurance carriers. So this does give us a tremendous visibility into what's going on in the front lines. So before we go into the presentation, just wanted to give a quick summary of what to expect. So we'll explain a little bit about what DORA is and the main objectives, summarize for you some of the common challenges facing organizations when looking to adopt DORA compliance. We'll do a quick comparison between DORA and NIS2, a directive that many of you will likely be aware of, that has recently gone into force. We'll delve into some of the main themes and requirements of DORA, and finally run through how Kroll can help organizations approach DORA compliance in the right way. Now, we're very fortunate to have leading experts from Kroll joining us today to go into more detail and provide their expert analysis. I'll start with Hannah Rositer, Managing Director of Financial Services Compliance and Regulation at Kroll. Hannah's based in Dubai. She has over 15 years of consulting experience and conducting compliance and risk framework reviews, undertaking assessments of existing frameworks and supervising outsourced compliance support programs, as well as outsourced or co-sourced internal audit functions for financial services firms. She has extensive experience working with financial services firms during supervisory inspections and audits, both preparing for and supporting firms as they undergo a visit from the regulator. So Hannah's financial services regulatory technical expertise covers areas such as operational resilience, which obviously falls into this topic of DORA that we're speaking of today, but also ICT framework security, the GDPR regulation as it relates to financial service firms, and key areas of focus for financial services regulators internationally as well. Our next speaker is Tiernan Connolly, Managing Director of Cyber and Data Resilience Service Line of Kroll. Now, Tiernan leverages more than 20 years of experience in the financial services and consultancy industry, and actually participates in the DORA consultation exercise in the lead up to forming the DORA regulation. So he'll use some of his experience to really help provide some light on some of the key requirements that will need to be focused on, but also the right approach for this. And his main focus in his career has been on domestic and international dimensions of cybersecurity, regulations, threat intelligence, strategy, risk, and governance. And he has played a pivotal role in developing industry intelligence sharing initiatives and frameworks. And at Kroll, Tiernan really works with clients to implement and strategically enhance their cybersecurity programs via business aligned and risk-based approach, ensuring that effective risk mitigation and regulatory compliance is put in place. So thank you both for joining. And with that, I'll hand over to yourself, Hannah, to kick us off.
Thank you very much, Ben. And so I think we'll get started, and welcome to those of you who've been able to join us live, and welcome also to those that are going to be listening to this recorded at a later date. I'd just add to what Ben says that although I'm currently located in Dubai, I've spent the last 25 years of my professional life living and working in the EU, which is how I became what I hope is fairly proficient in the EU regulatory framework. But we'll talk today about what DORA is, and we'll also talk about why DORA, because that's a quite an important aspect to understand, and is also going to help, I think, internally in discussions with senior management and staff members to explain why the European Union is headed in this direction. The first key figure, I guess, to note in relation to DORA is 22,000. 22,000 financial entities, that's the terminology that the rules use to describe financial firms, financial businesses, are caught by the rules, as well as a number of ICT service providers who operate within the EU. So first thing to understand is the scope is extensive. You've got down there on the bottom right hand side of the screen the lists of types of financial entities, that different categories of financial entities that you can identify in the rules, and those include banks, credit institutions, investment firms, insurance companies, asset managers, credit rating agencies, ICT third-party service providers themselves, and importantly, digital asset service providers, crypto firms, also caught by DORA. What is, why rather, has the European Commission decided to draft and then roll this single set of rules out across the EU? Individual EU member states have for various periods of time, and some for quite a long time, had their own domestic rules around how financial firms should be structuring their internal operations, and particularly with regard to information security and ICT provisions. And the purpose of DORA is really to align across the EU and have a single set of rules, single standard, well understood by all financial entities, all operating at a single level. And a lot of that decision and the momentum that's picked up over the previous years has been because, as we all know, cybersecurity and information, protecting clients' information, client data and client assets has become critical as a service within, critical aspect of the service that financial services firms provide. So it was, although different national competent authorities, the names that we give to the local regulators in the EU, although they had understood and were putting rules in place on a domestic level, the Commission felt that there needed to be an overriding EU-wide set of rules. And as we'll see in a minute, they are, in some cases, or some firms, going to be quite extensive and onerous to adopt. Helpful, I think, to think about what DORA is trying to achieve in terms of the 5 main pillars that structure the rules. The first one is really to ensure that there is accountability and proper governance at a senior level. So board members are responsible for the ICT frameworks that are in place. They are responsible for the processes that are implemented in terms of selecting third parties, and ultimately the buck stops with them. And the regulatory authorities within the EU want to see evidence that that accountability is in place and that reporting lines are present. The other aspect to bear in mind is that, not news for many of us who have been operating the financial services sector for a while, that risk management frameworks are critical. But here the idea is that the IT risk management framework has to be an integral part of the firm's business activities. So you think back maybe 15 or so years ago, you'd be looking at different areas of risk management, and you would be looking at this type of risk, but today the regulator says no, we want this dealt with as one of the key areas of the risk framework that the firm has in place. Third-party selection and monitoring of third-party providers, and the notion that we'll talk about a bit later about critical ICT providers. There are some detailed rules around selection, contracting, and oversight of those providers. Again, not a concept that's new to those of us who've been in the FS space for a while. It's always been part of the requirements under different EU directives that you would be you'd have specific processes in place and contractual provisions when outsourcing. But here, those provisions are specifically targeted at the areas that DORA covers. Incident response and reporting, a big part of the DORA requirements, and we'll see in a minute that some of those reporting timeframes are extremely tight, in some cases just a number of hours. And really at the operational heart of DORA is this idea that you're addressing vulnerabilities and threats in an active way operationally within your business, and your policies and procedures in this area are really documenting what you're doing on an operational level. Okay, so we'll go very quickly through this because as you'll already see, a lot of these dates are already behind us, and so the majority of the rules, well, in fact, today, as we currently stand, we now have, I believe, all of the RTS published that are relevant for DORA. It did actually come into force, technically speaking, in 2023, but don't panic. The date for firms to demonstrate compliance isn't until January next year, but effectively January 2025, all firms have to demonstrate that they are in compliance from January next year onwards. Then what we're likely to see, normal practice within the EU, is that the supervisory authorities will give a period of about 18-24 months for firms to sort of bed in whatever systems they are or frameworks, compliance frameworks they've adopted, and then it is likely that a round of common supervisory actions will start, or reviews taking place at an EU level, looking at certain sectors of the population or certain sizes of firms, going in and making sure that DORA has been properly understood, and then there'll be publication of any potentially enforcement action that results out of that. So we'll have to wait probably until 26, 27 before that starts to become public, but there will be a way to sort of benchmark whether what you've done and what you've continued to do is in line with what the regulators are expecting. We'll start to see some of that coming out in about 24-36 months time, I would have thought. Okay, again here just a reminder of what we've spoken about already, the 5 key pillars within DORA. And one aspect perhaps that we didn't already touch on is the notion of information sharing. We'll see in a few minutes that deadlines for reporting are quite tight. There are some very prescriptive parts to DORA, particularly within the RTS. And the fact that certain reporting requirements are to be done in a prescribed format with which has been passed down from at the EU level, and that's intended to allow national competent authorities to have identical reporting across the whole of the EU and make comparisons between firms in different jurisdictions easier, and also to roll up to the central level so that there could be an EU-wide analysis of what's going on. And in fact, we're already seeing some instances in some jurisdictions of national regulators reaching out and confirming that that's their intention, and asking when these registers are going to be ready. Okay, on to the next slide. And I think now, Tina, we've spoken about the why, the what, the when, the who. When I think what's of interest to most people on this call is possibly what we're going to move towards now is, okay, all that said, what does that mean? What are the challenges? What are the difficulties that we've seen, and how can we try and alleviate some of those?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Anna. So yeah, based on our experience working with organizations and also speaking to regulators over the last few years, we've put together a list of some of the key challenges and pitfalls and what we'd recommend to watch out for, and then also plan for when you're delivering your DORA program. So if you see the first one here, for example, is getting early stakeholder and awareness and leadership buy-in. This is critical to ensure you communicate, educate, and get the support from your senior stakeholders for your program. So as Hannah said earlier, they're ultimately accountable for DORA compliance as described by the regulators. So it's in yours and their best interest that they know what's required, the complexity of the remediation activities, and also the resourcing that's going to be required to implement them and achieve compliance. And then if you move on to the second one here, we've got the DORA requirements in particular. Like, they're very prescriptive and they can be very challenging to interpret. So a top tip here is when you're carrying out your gap analysis exercises, for example, is clearly documenting not only if you have a gap and what your compliance and control level is, but also your organization's interpretation of that requirement. So this will prove valuable for future regulatory inquiries and supervisory inspections, but also for internal audits and second line compliance assessments as well, which often go through these citations on a citation by citation level as well. And this ties in with the next point also, which we'll cover in a bit more detail in a few minutes as well. But this concept of proportionality helps with the complexity of DORA. So understanding how it applies to your organization, the flexibility it gives your organization for adhering to the requirements using a risk-based and business-aligned manner. So that will, and that will really help. And also, again, document how you're using that proportionality during your gap assessment will also prove extremely useful in the long term when you've got regulatory queries as well down the line. And then finally, we have the third party piece here. So one of the requirements is around the third party registers. So the regulators have published templates which organizations need to populate and maintain. And these can be very onerous to manage. So it's important to assign clear ownership and accountability within your organization for these registers, if not already done so, and automate their population from existing data repositories as well, as much as possible. So moving on to the next slide. So yeah, as Ben mentioned, we just want to quickly segue into, before we take a deeper look at DORA, just to cover another regulation that's very similar, and that's actually coming into enforcement into the EU. Today is when the member states are supposed to be transposing it, but it looks like there will be delays in some of the countries. And that's the Network and Information Systems Directive, also known as NIS2. So we have a brief comparison here of the two regulations, but in essence, they both aim to create a higher common level of digital and cyber risk, or cyber resilience, for organizations operating in the EU. So they have similar teams, similar requirements on effective governance, third-party risk, incident reporting processes, etc. The key difference is DORA is focused solely on the financial services sector, while NIS2 is applicable to a whole suite of other sectors, from energy, transportation, to manufacturing and digital infrastructure as well. So depending on your industry and business operations, some of you may have companies in your portfolio, for example, that fall in scope of NIS2, so it's just worth being aware of this very important regulation also. Okay, so with that said, we can move on then to take a deeper dive into DORA's main pillars. The first one being ICT risk management, which is a set of specific obligations for organizations to embed a comprehensive risk management framework for their ICT systems. It includes technical and monitoring requirements that cover governance, roles and responsibilities, policies and procedures, regular assessments, which all should be implemented in a repeatable and evergreen manner. So Hannah also mentioned as well, like DORA is an uplift of previous regulations. So the good news here is that many organizations, especially for this pillar, are likely doing a lot of these activities already, because DORA revises and expands upon previous EBA guidelines around cyber and IT risk management. That one big thing that jumps out is that greater emphasis that DORA puts on the company's management body and board as being ultimately responsible for digital operational resilience. So they need to define or ensure its implementation, oversee the framework and strategy, as well as maintaining a level of what the regulators are calling sufficient knowledge of all times of the risks and the measures in place to mitigate them. So in addition, as well as these big uplift and creation of policies and procedures, which is required, that cover asset management, data classification, incident management, many of which you probably already have in place. There will be specific other policies and procedures you might need to create, such as IT project management and change management as well. And then off the back of this documentation uplifts, of course, you have to align your actual processes and controls with what's in those standards and policies as well. So there'll need to be those associated controls and risk assessments will need to be implemented and conducted on a regular basis. For example, following significant changes to network infrastructure and information systems, you need to carry out a risk assessment. If you're using legacy technologies across your environment, which most organizations are, you need to carry out regular risks assessments and the evaluation of what is the risk of keeping these legacy technologies in your environment and what additional controls you can put around them as well. So if we move on then to the next slide, where we have take a look at that second pillar, which is around incident reporting. So DORA expects entities to establish process and systems, not only for monitoring, classifying, and responding to incidents, but also reporting to the regulators. And this is not just for cybersecurity incidents, but also for operational IT incidents as well. And also notifications to affected clients and partners as appropriate. So in terms of classification of incidents, they've published a set of predefined criteria to help do this, and that includes things like criteria like the number of users and clients impacted, the criticality and the duration of your service downtime, the data loss, as well as economic impact. The specific reporting and requirements templates have already been published as well, and as you can see on the slide here, with the timeframes have been published. So you need to initial reports need to be sent within 4 hours after the incident's been determined as major, or in any event within 24 hours of the detection. And then an intermediate notification sent within 72 hours, which should include what steps you've been taking to date and what's the progress towards a resolution of the incident. And then there's a final report required within 1 month, which should detail all of the incident resolution and as well as the root cause analysis. So as you can see, this is going to represents really tight timelines for organizations, and everybody's going to need to put in define proactively your response plans, as well as how you're going to coordinate internally between your incident response teams, the impacted business functions, as well as counsel as well, to be able to classify those incidents and be able to report them in the timelines that DORA is expecting. One thing to note before we move on, though, is that DORA, of course, its whole objective is of harmonizing the regulatory landscape and reducing the administrative burden. And that goes for duplicate reporting as well. So DORA's requirements around incident reporting are what's termed lex specialis to other requirements such as PSD2 and NIS2. So this basically means it subsumes and replaces those requirements for in-scope financial institutions, which is at least some good news. So if we move on to the next slide, then here we have a breakdown of the types of resiliency testing that DORA maps out as required in that third key pillar. So these are all intended to help organizations evaluate their defenses and identify and remediate vulnerabilities in their environment proactively. With all tests, with all plans, etc., it's very important that these are documented as well, and that you have them readily, the results as well readily available if there's supervisory queries as well in advance. So yeah, this list is not exhaustive, but you've got vulnerability scanning, you've got pen testing, incident response, tabletop exercises, a really valuable way to rehearse, educate, and prepare internal stakeholders for incidents, for example. And of course, we have the requirement for threat-led pen testing, which is called TLPT for short. So this is essentially a red teaming exercise, and is particularly relevant for organizations that are deemed significant under the ECB's single supervisory mechanism. who will have to undergo one of these TLPT exercises at least every 3 years. These are essentially tightly controlled assessments of your cyber resiliency via simulation of real-life threat actors' activities. And it's really important, if you're in scope for this test, that your preparation and planning is done well in advance. You need to scope out what kind of assets and services are in scope for being targeted, and they need to align with your critical and important functions. And there's extensive governance and planning involved. So these can take up, for example, to 9 months to execute the whole process from beginning to end, and with the remediation activities afterwards taking many months also as well. So yeah, getting ahead of that in advance by identifying and vetting what vendors you're going to use, for example, is highly recommended.
Okay. Thanks, Tina. So a couple of minutes now of discussion around one of the aspects that we've already highlighted, the focus on third-party risk management, ICT service providers. There are multiple references in the rules to criticality, to important or critical services. I think in some parts of the regulations, the term crucial also appears, and this is really to make sure that firms are distinguishing between ICT service providers who are necessary for running their businesses, and those where, you know, the service being provided or the functions that are being supported by those service providers are themselves critical. And that has there's two challenges there. One is that the notion of critical isn't one that you can associate with a specific firm. So unlike the rules that came out, ESMA rules that came out, I believe, about 3 or 4 years ago now, cloud service providers, where I think at some point the regulator had gone through, an EU regulator had gone through an exercise of kind of listing them out, although they didn't publish the list. There is no way to sort of identify a specific service provider as being critical and others being non-critical. It will depend on the firm's own assessment of the functions or services that on which it's relying. Are those critical for its business? Yes, no. And a business of an equivalent nature in another jurisdiction may use that provider in a different way and come to a different conclusion. And this is an important point to make, because we're often asked if we can assist in this area and maybe help in terms of repapering exercises, and what shall I say to firm X who's now asking, you know, what contractual provisions we need, are they critical, are they non-critical? And the answer is that's going to depend on your own assessment internally of how the exercise that you've gone through and the results of that exercise. And again, back to points that Tina was making, important there's consistency throughout, and whatever's happening in terms of contractual provisions and identification of critical service providers has to reflect what's gone on before. The other aspect also that one of the other aspects, because there are numerous critical ICT providers, there's a requirement on firms to have a documented and tested exit plan, as you might imagine, more onerous, making sure that the onboarding of those providers, the ongoing monitoring of service being provided, and then the day that something happens and you need to switch to a different provider, all of those aspects of the relationship appear in DORA, and there are some very detailed requirements at each of those stages that firms need to understand first of all, and then reflect upon, and then make sure they have the right documentation in place, because the requirement isn't just to have an exit plan, it's to have a documented exit plan that you can then produce either to a regulator or to your internal audit teams or to any third party that asks you for it. So that's it's important to understand that difference between critical, non-critical, and also to understand that it's your individual assessment in each case, and that assessment needs to be reflected everywhere throughout the process, right from the beginning of your work to categorize or classify it as a third-party provider, and then the contractual arrangements that you put in place. Okay, can we go on to the next slide? So we've talked about the difference between the two, between critical, non-critical, critical and important, and non-critical. So I think the terminology is different types of terms are used throughout the rules. Two parts, obviously, to your process. You're going to be looking at selection and onboarding, and again, lots of detailed requirements. Some of which are not going new to financial services firms, because there's always been quite a big focus on making sure you're getting your vendor selection right. But in this specific instance, there are detailed criteria that the rules expect to see being run through when you're going through that selection process, and criteria that are specific to ICT service providers, and not just a broader definition of vendor. Contractual provisions, we've spoken a little bit about that. So there'll be more that you'll need to put into the contract with a critical ICT provider than perhaps there will be for one that's assessed as being non-critical. But nevertheless, even in the non-critical service provider, ICT service providers contract arrangements, there'll be a number of compulsory provisions that have to appear. So once you've onboarded that third party, you then have a number of requirements in terms of ongoing monitoring, everything that you have required of that provider contractually. You'll need to make sure you're testing and making sure that they do have that in place, and those testing provisions will need to be documented. And a big part of those of us who've been in the FS space for a while, particularly on the compliance side, know that there's no, unless there's evidence of compliance testing or internal audit testing, it's as though, from a regulator's perspective, it's as though it's never happened. I've mentioned already a little bit about the offboarding, the exit strategies, the exit plans, sorry, that firms have to have in place, particularly for critical service providers. Those need to be documented, properly identified, and available if they are requested. I think now we are back to Tiernan, who's just going to give really try and put some context around some of the detailed provisions in DORA and how they fit with the overall life cycle of the businesses that you guys work in or are running.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so this slide is actually really important, because if we take a step back and look at the big theme objective of DORA and the hints in the name, the regulators really want cyber and tech risk to be viewed and treated under this wider umbrella or of broader operational and business resiliency risk. So to that end, as Hannah was mentioning, we see these terms and requirements peppered throughout the DORA text and standards that highlight and focus on the need to link up and integrate your cyber and tech activities into firm-wide business continuity processes, such as business impact analysis, response and recovery, and related tests, for example. So for organizations that have like a dedicated business resiliency function or a BCP team, this means working closely with them, feeding in details from a tech and cyber perspective about high-risk incidents and describing those scenarios, how they could impact your organization, and then ensuring that at a minimum, the critical and important functions which assets need to be mapped to under DORA's requirements, that they have disaster recovery plans in place, and also that they're regularly reviewed, at least on an annual basis. This particular activity is so important, or this capability in doing this is so important, that if you may have heard about or been involved in the ECB cyber stress test earlier in the year, this was the key focus of what they were looking at and testing with organizations who carried out that stress test. So there's no doubt they will be zeroing in on this this particular aspect as well during their supervisory monitoring activities over the coming years. So yeah, so moving on then, let's move on. We can take a look at proportionality. So as with NIS2, which I mentioned earlier, proportionality is an extremely important concept in DORA. So very important to familiarize yourself with it and see how you can leverage it to navigate compliance. So as you've seen, DORA wants every organization understand your risks, then take steps and measures to ensure you're able to monitor, detect, withstand, and recover from any threats or disruptions. But the implementation of these associated countermeasures should be and can be proportional. So in other words, they're commensurate with the risk for your organization. So what that means in a practical sense is that, look, DORA's full scope for many organizations. The majority of financial entities we're speaking to are coming to us in terms of their full scope for DORA. But for others, their applicability and implementation requirements as well will depend on the size and nature of your organization, its operations, and the overall risk to which you're subjected. So we're seeing some like boutique trading firms, for example, can adopt a simplified ICT risk management framework, covering only the areas that are relevant to their operations. While there's also a category called micro enterprises as well, which DORA categorizes as fewer than 10 people and whose annual turnover does not exceed 2 million euros. So they're subject to even less stringent applications of these requirements. So such as not having to define roles and responsibilities and functions for overseeing informal roles internally for overseeing risk and crisis management, for example, as well. So in terms of proportionality, just to summarize, the principle is peppered throughout the text. It's there to allow organizations to balance the need for appropriate adherence to the requirements from DORA and implementation of security measures. Achieving that balance can be challenging. You need to still understand and evaluate your specific risk posture. But again, very important, it does allow you to focus your efforts, your investment in a risk-based manner, and making sure that you got the right security measures that reduce your very specific and your highest risks as well. Back over to you, Hannah.
Thanks very much, Tin. And just to let you know, we will be taking questions, and we have had questions already. Just bear with us another few minutes, and we'll come on to the questions that I can see you've been asking in the chat, and we'll do our best to address those. One of the things that we'd like to touch on now is how can we at Kroll help each of you in your respective organisations to first understand what it is you need to do, and then get on and do it. So if we can go to the next slide, this is really drawn from our experience over the last 18 months or so. Very often, our experience with clients is that the ask of us is to help them to understand, first of all, where they currently are and what kind of work is required in order to meet the requirements under the rules that come into force in January of next year. And so that would seem to be consistent and logical, given that we've had this period up till now where many firms have been very busy implementing, trying to understand what the standards are, measuring their own internal setup, and as we've been saying up till now, a lot of things already in place in terms of risk management frameworks, vendor onboarding processes. So in many cases, there's an adjustment to be made, but there isn't all to do. What we've started seeing more recently is firms coming to us with specific requests for assistance in specific areas. And I think that's because we're now at a point where many firms are already through that initial assessment exercise, although maybe some smaller firms are still in it. But in many cases, what we're seeing is questions around specific questions on the technical side around penetration testing, wanting to do so desktop exercises to run through some of the processes that have been adopted. So this description here around the assessment work or the compliance assessment exercise that we've been through with our clients is still one that we're doing, but it does represent, I think, the start of a longer process, and those sort of key 3 stages. Where are you now? What does the path to full compliance with DORA look like? And I think the key takeaway here is you've got some examples on the right-hand side here of the kind of reporting tools that we use for clients. But I think the key area of focus for us and for our clients really going forward to the end of this year and beyond is looking at ongoing solutions for, right, I've got my framework in place, but how am I going to monitor this on an ongoing basis? Tiernan was talking earlier about the importance of interconnectivity between different sources of data, so that registers and reporting requirements can be populated with existing data. All of that requires change internally or adjustments to be made so that those things can come about. If we just go on to the next slide, I think that's really the focus here is, as I've mentioned, is much more on the implementation assistance work that we're now getting into. The gap assessment or compliance assessment exercises that we're still doing for a number of firms are fairly sort of well developed now, and I think the methodology is one that most compliance and internal audit teams are going to be familiar with, and does have an advantage in that it helps to familiarise staff within the organisation with the detail of the rules. And one of the things that you've heard over and over again over the last 40 minutes or so is the fact that there are specific requirements, there are detailed requirements, there's a prescriptive format. I think having gone through this exercise now with, I don't know, probably north of 15 or so firms, every time what we hear is surprise at the level of prescriptive detail that exists in certain areas of the rules. So it does, DORA compliance does represent quite a heavy lift for some organisations, although there may be situations where you're able to avail yourself of the proportionality principles, and in some cases there are, for very small firms, there are exemptions for what the rules refer to as micro enterprises. But really, I think our focus going forward will be to continue to be able to offer these gap assessment exercises, but then pretty quickly help firms to get started on the implementation phase.
So,
I think this is, yeah. Sorry, Tin, and this one's yours.
No problem. So yeah, so following the gap assessment and those policies and procedures, like of course then organizations are inevitably going to have to put what's in those control policies and procedures into place. So yeah, Kroll can support across every one of these pillars from an IT risk management space. We can help with implementing that framework and strategy, ensuring it links up with your IT business strategy, as well as all these other key functions like BCP and third-party governance. In the second pillar there on incident response and reporting, so Kroll has a global team of incident response and forensic experts that can be placed on retainer, ready to respond when you need it most. We have a managed SOC service that monitors your environment on a 24/7 basis. We can help with incident response processes, playbooks, as well as tabletop exercises as well, which is a key requirement. On the resiliency testing perspective, again, we cover everything from pen test, red team exercises to the development of robust vulnerability management and patch management programs as well for organizations. And then last but not least, with the IT third-party risk on the right, a huge area of focus for the regulators, not least because of the increase in incidents that are happening at organizations that are actually manifesting via their supply chain and vendors. So super important to get on top of that. We can help with third-party risk management, register frameworks. We can help automate mapping the assets to not only the critical and important functions, but also to your third-party services as well, which DORA requires as well. due diligence assessments, as well as the contractual reviews, which Hannah mentioned earlier.
Okay, well, I think we're coming towards the end, but we just wanted to leave you with a, you know, why do we feel that Kroll is well placed to support financial entities with DORA compliance? I think it's because we're able to deliver a mix of skill and expertise, both on the technical side. I mean, Tin and I work very closely on a number of engagements to make sure that our clients who generally come to us with at least 2 or 3 internal functions represented, right? So you're going to have people from the compliance team who are primarily driven by the requirement to make sure that the firm's compliant. Senior management obviously are very concerned to make sure that the business isn't in a situation in 12, 18 months time where the regulator could point to areas of non-compliance. And then the firm's internal IT and information security specialists are anxious to know what's required, because a lot of the time changes are going to have to happen, and they're going to require, in some cases, quite a lot of interaction with third parties and some lead time. So that interaction of people with sort of FS regulatory background, well used to working in alongside compliance staff within regulated entities, and our colleagues from the with backgrounds in cyber and are able to come together and cover off all parts of the organisation internally, without necessarily having to go to a specific cyber firm and then mandate another firm on the regulatory side and hope that at some point the two will match up, because those are situations that I've had experience of in the past, and don't always result in a lighter workload for the business. So not only can we assist in a collaborative way, bringing different skill sets together at the outset, but we've also got, as a business, solutions within Kroll that firms can onboard and use to make sure that on an ongoing basis reporting requirements are managed adequately, and ongoing monitoring of service providers, outsourced ICT service providers, is done in a rigorous and consistent way. Okay, we have 13 minutes left, I believe, until we're up the hour, and we've had a few questions that have come in, which we will try to answer. We've had a question about revisions to contractual agreements with critical ICT service providers. Is this a requirement under DORA? Is it a recommendation? It is a requirement. It is not a recommendation. I am not sure that there are any parts of the DORA rules which are expressed as recommendations, or I would understand them to be recommendations. You are in compliance or you are not. That's the way that the directives, regulations, and then implementing technical standards and regulatory standards work. So you will have to go back once you've done your assessment exercise, critical, non-critical, looking at what the provider is doing for you, and take the rules which set out exactly what needs to appear in the contract, and make sure that the existing contract with your vendor has those clauses in it, or more likely you'll have to go back and renegotiate with that third party, who is likely to be in a similar exercise with a number of other clients also. What else do we have as questions? We have a question here, Tin, on TPPs.
Yeah, so yeah, just to add on to that point as well, like, yeah, it is mandatory. The only voluntary / recommended requirements, with the citations within the DORA text are in the information sharing pillar. So So there, yeah, everything in the other pillars, especially in third-party risk, is mandatory. However, DORA does adopt a tiered approach to the contract updates, like the critical and important functions. You've got more updates, and like the right to audit needs to be in there, for example, as well. And there's a tiered approach with prioritizing additional clauses to be implemented for that specific, more critical business services. And then, yeah, so I see there's a question here around the TPP. So is there that are in the EU? So that's the critical third-party providers. So DORA is quite unique in that it's not just focusing on financial industry, it's focusing on the key technology firms that are leveraged and used by the financial industry. So who are going to be on that list, and are they going to themselves going to be regulated? Essentially, yes, they are. And there's already activities I know that that there's oversight from ECB on these major cloud providers. So yeah, you're going to have Microsoft, AWS. They're going to be essentially supervised as part of this, as part of DORA supervisory activities. And there will be a lot more, I suspect, organizations added to that list of critical third-party providers. And yeah, it'll be treated separately to the supervision of your classic financial institutions. But yeah, that's a key aspect of DORA, which is really interesting. And it also really highlights that the concerns from the regulators on the systemic impact of if one of these cloud providers go down, for example, and the concentration risk as well that Hannah mentioned. Like if you're just using one cloud provider, the regulators are very keen to get organizations to start thinking about portability across multiple cloud providers. In case one of them has a major incident and goes down, you'll be able to keep your business resilient, essentially.
Okay. So we got some other questions here. I'll take the ones that I can answer easily, and I'll leave the other ones to Tiernan. Are UCITS management companies in scope? Yes, they are. They're asset management companies, and so would be in scope for DORA. There's another question here around whether incident reporting under DORA in some way could supersede any GDPR related reporting requirements. What I would say there is, let's take a step back and think about what each sets of rules apply to. So GDPR is intended to protect personal data. DORA is a requirement on financial services firms, to not use the full financial entities definition, to make sure that the incident reporting requirements there, as Tiernan mentioned earlier, they are operational in nature and ICT related. So we're talking about two different things here. So you may have a situation where you have a reporting requirement that arises under GDPR, which has no operational aspect to it. They are two separate frameworks, and they will require monitoring and reporting requirements in each regulatory framework. It may well be that there's overlap between the two, but unfortunately a reporting requirement met under GDPR, which will be to the relevant data protection authority in the EU, or in the UK it's the has a looky-likey regime, will not be deemed to have met the incident reporting requirement under DORA, because fundamentally they're two separate, the purposes of those reporting requirements are different. Okay, what else have we got?
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but yeah, there was like every incident's going to have to be, so at least you've got the conflation of operational IT incidents and cybersecurity incidents under DORA, but yeah, each incident that occurs will need to be assessed across each of your legal entities, as whether it's also GDPR. So I've been there myself. It can be quite onerous, especially with now these two new time constraints.
Indeed. We've got a question about micro enterprises. And the actual question is, where in DORA is the definition? I would not like to say, but do you remember off the top of your head? I do think I probably give the definition. Do you remember
No, I don't. But it's in there. I think there's actually we can share some good links as well in terms of where you can actually search through quite easily for terms as well within the DORA and RTSs. But yeah, the micro enterprises, as I just mentioned, it's like less than 10 people. But yeah, they're the key, and I think what was the certain revenue and turnover each year. But there is a detailed description within one of those RTSs. But yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head, but we can share that link.
The other thing I'd also say about the definition of micro enterprises is hopefully your businesses, as they continue to grow and succeed, will develop, and you may well fit within that definition on a given day. But you need to keep your eye on that to see at what point you may trigger, you may fall out of it, and then you need to look at the proportionality arrangements that are available to you under DORA, because at some point DORA will kick in. How closely are other jurisdictions such as the UK and the US aligning to DORA? So the UK does have a similar regime in place, or has, which I believe was adopted maybe 2-3 years ago, or which takes a lot of the content of the EU DORA directive and incorporates that into the UK regulatory framework. On the US side, I wouldn't like to say. I'm not expert enough. I know that the SEC, for instance, has had for a long time now a focus on what it refers to as cybersecurity, which is probably as close as you'll get to our definition of operational resilience. But maybe Tiernan, you've got some thoughts on the US.
Yeah. So yeah, look, every regulator around the world is moving towards this larger moving to resilience and putting tech and cyber risk under resilience. DORA is the first of its kind globally to go into this level of prescriptiveness, and tying it all in with third party risk and linking in with the business resilience BCP. But yeah, we expect pretty much every regulator to gradually align with similar regulations over time, similar to what happened with GDPR essentially in Europe. So there's pretty much copycats all over the world. And there has been reports of seeing the US regulators have been focusing initially on dialogue with ECB as well as UK regulators around incident response or incident reporting to the regulators. Like I mentioned earlier, they don't want to create too much onerous activities and duplication of reporting. So I understand there is ongoing conversations between the three regulatory bodies from each of those regions/countries around how they can align more closely and specifically initially looking at the incident reporting requirements first of all, but I would expect that to expand and broaden to cover the other domains, for example, that are in DORA as well.
Okay. Well, I think we're almost out of time now, and we recognise that people have set aside this slot to participate, and we hope we've answered as many of your questions as we can. Those that we haven't, we'll try and do so and follow up by email afterwards. But thank you for your time today. Thanks very much to Axel and to Ben for your support in putting this event on, and thanks Tiernan for yet another successful webinar.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to tune in. So we hope you found this session really informative. Just to say, you will find the DORA compliance assessment brochure in the handout section of your client. So do take a look at that as well to learn a bit more about our services, how we can help. When you leave the briefing, you will be directed to a short survey. So if you could spare a few moments, we'd greatly appreciate if you could tell us your thoughts on the session, as this helps us prepare for future sessions as well. So once again, thanks a lot for joining us today. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Tiernan, for speaking. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you again at one of future briefings.